the roster.
I think we're good to go.
Okay, sounds good. So which one is it? There we go. Okay, so I will hover above names, and if you're willing to say your name and what organization you represent, we can just get, I think we got the feedback that everybody's still kind of getting to know each other. So Ryan, you're up first.
Hi, sorry, I just had to run and grab something. I'm Ryan Bourne. I own Office Liquidators and a multi-tenant building along West Broadway in Brooklyn Park, and live in Golden Valley. So that's my story, and just looking forward to keeping the process going.
John? Thought I saw John on. Matthew?
Good morning, everyone. This is Matt Kenning. I'm with Takeda. I'm the site head for their biologics manufacturing plant here in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota.
Don't know if I saw Candace. I don't know if I saw Kevin. Kevin is our North Memorial representative. Obviously, I saw Mike.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Steinhauser. I'm the manager of Robin Shopping Center, own several properties in New Hope and Robbinsdale. I'm also chairman of the board at North Memorial Healthcare. Live in the Northwest Quadrant. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Cutter. I am a Golden Valley resident, a long time.
Oh, you muted yourself.
Sorry, that rarely happens with me. So I live in Golden Valley, and I also work very heavily in Golden Valley and around the metro because I'm in real estate, and am very involved in the real estate community, both on a state and a local level. So that's me.
Don't know if I saw Kenya. Or Jimmy. Chris? Tim, you're up.
Good morning again, everybody. Tim Baylor, representing the Robbinsdale Chamber of Commerce and owner of McDonald's.
Alex.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Alex Burns. I'm here representing the Minneapolis Regional Chamber via Move Minneapolis, where I work, and I also live in Minneapolis as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia Perry. I am the executive director of the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition.
Don't know if we have Lucian on. Or Steph. Jackson. And I saw Ian.
Hello, Ian Alexander, real estate developer, lawyer, and general North Side annoyance.
Sophia, you missed me. You called my name, John Hacker, Design Ready Controls, the CFO.
Oh, sorry, John.
No, it's all right. I was muted and you called my name and I wasn't quite ready. So.
Anybody else that jumped on that wants to introduce themselves? Okay, chairs, if there's anything else with introductions, otherwise I think we're ready to move to approval of the minutes if one of you wants to lead us through that.
Felicia, you want to take the lead, or would you want Tim or I to do that?
You can go ahead.
All right. First off, I assume everybody's had a chance to read the meeting minutes. I'd like to open it up if there's any discussion on those meeting minutes, any changes. If not, can I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved. This is Tim.
Can I get a second, please?
Second, this is Felicia.
All in favor, sign aye.
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 All right, any opposed, same sign? All right, meetings have been approved. Jumping into the community engagement activities. Sophia, you want to run through that real quick?
Yes. Let me get it up. Okay, and scroll through to so this topic kind of came up from our co-chairs, as well as kind of our desire to report to you just some very preliminary feedback about what we're hearing so far. And so I'm echoing, so I don't know if others are hearing that.
Yeah, if you're not speaking, could you mute, please?
So I'll just launch in. You know, we're starting to get feedback on the route options, and there's been multiple ways that we've heard from folks so far. So of course we've talked to all of you, you know, in group discussion, and many have reached out individually to talk as well. And I kind of add to that, you know, I really like connecting with all of you. So if you do want to talk offline, if I haven't reached out, please reach out to me. It's really nice to connect with all of you. We've had the 3 town halls with about 150 participants. We're starting to have, you know, more one-on-one conversations, both with community and with businesses. We need to have a lot more of those. We've had about 200 comments on the interactive map, and the survey has had over 700 responses. When I put together this presentation, we're just at 700. We're starting to get closer to 800. So keep that in mind also when we go through the what we've heard so far from it. Folks have also been submitting comments. So the kind of 2 things come in through email or from our online form. There's, you know, kind of this official comment on the record, and then there's been a whole bunch of conversations that I've had where people are just asking questions, and whether that's through phone or email. So this is just a picture of our interactive map. You can see people starting to kind of engage on potential station locations, the issues and opportunities. And then all these comments are public, so if anybody wants to poke around and kind of see what folks are saying, you can see the comments as well as the responses, if you're interested. So through all of these places that we've been getting feedback, I have just a couple kind of highlights, and both it's themes that are emerging and some of the early statistics. So overall, I think from all of our forums, what we've been hearing so far is that there's a general support for LRT and transit improvement, but that's heavily caveated with needing more information, right? So the general idea is supported, but a lot of folks are at that place where it's like, well, before I say yes, this, I need more data. And so that's been kind of universal across the board. And kind of diving into that a little bit more, there's some very specific questions that come up in all of these places. So, and the biggest one is just impacts to adjacent homes or businesses, exactly what the roadway would look like. So just like, what does this LRT mean for my space? And really the desire to not have property impacts, or as little as possible. That, you know, that was a theme that we heard in our initial engagement, even before we released the routes, and as we've put them into the world, that is something that is continued through. There's basically 3 things that we get the most questions about so far. So kind of in the feedback that we're receiving, and I'm going to take the list upwards, is stations, right? Is that's part of the discussion of, if I'm going to support this route, where are my stations? You know, the line can't exist in isolation. So that's kind of question number one. Question number two has been structures. How do we get structures? How do we select structures? Where could there be structures? How does that process work? So that has been, you know, a thing that we've heard across the board as well. And then there's been actually this kind of big push for really thinking about our green infrastructure and making the project as environmentally forward as possible. And you know, that kind of is manifested in a couple kinds of comments. One, just the desire to have a very transit-oriented lifestyle, having very walkable environments, but then also kind of trying to push us with possible solutions to make our infrastructure even greener, whether that's stormwater management or more planting on the tracks, or kind of that kind of stuff that has also emerged. So next, I'm going to go through some of the preliminary survey results, because that's I think that was the question from folks. Just really want to know that the responses that we received so far, we really want like triple or more of that in terms of people responding. So these numbers really have the potential that this could be completely different. And I also want to caveat some of the numbers. So far, about 55%, you know, the question is asked, like, what do you want to see advanced the most? Kind of about 55% have said so far West Broadway. 22% of that have said Lowry, and about 23%, you know, say they can't take a stance, right, until they have more information. And then kind of in that, folks don't have a preference. You know, you get a few responses of, you know, neither, none of it, no LRT. Okay, so that's baked into this as well, and kind of splits a little bit evenly. And I'd also say, you know, a survey is, it's not really, it's good to get kind of some initial response, but as you talked to various people, you know, you hear different things. Like, for example, I was with some Ward 4 residents, and you know, it was a smaller group, but you heard more about Lowry, right? Because that's where the neighborhoods are. So it's good feedback, but just a snapshot of the overall analysis we need to do. This committee talked a little bit about the project goals, and we need to come back to that in future meetings as we kind of flesh that out a little bit. But in the survey itself, we asked people to kind of name their priorities, and two have kind of become front runners in that. So one is improving transit access and those connections to jobs and regional destinations. And then the one that I think we talked about, because it kind of got pulled out, it wasn't originally part of our when we did the previous project, but it really, that lends to equity and reducing regional racial disparities in particular. So these two have really emerged as things that people want us to consider the most as we're beginning to rate the project. And again, all of these numbers, as we hear from more folks, could change substantially. When we kind of close the survey at the end of the month, this might be completely different, but just wanting to get people kind of that initial blush of what's coming in.
Sophia, Mike Steinhauser, your question for you.
Yep.
As far as the survey goes, we've done one now. I don't think there's still been a lot of community awareness about this yet. As the community awareness increases, will you do another survey?
You know, that's a good question, Mike, and I would say for sure. And also kind of round two of survey is, you know, as we get more kind of details and we're able to share those, we'll kind of want to get as much feedback as we can on the existing survey, but then we'll also want to kind of update the question as we move along, because, you know, kind of the next point in the year is to have a draft report. But I think the project goal would be basically all those components that are going to be in this report, that this committee and the community begins to see before we kind of release it. So we'll wanna ask new questions, right, in different ways, and so it's like that combination of both. You know, we need more and more folks to know about the project and come along with us. I really feel like we've just, and you can all agree with it, we're just kind of starting to scratch the surface of engagement, and needing to do a lot more work with that.
Thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Joan to talk about the community consultant or the community engagement cohort. And just also want to acknowledge we have a couple that are folks that are part of that on the call with us today. So there is some overlap between the two groups.
Good morning. I'm Joan Van Holla, engagement specialist at Hennepin County, and it's great to hear Sophia talk about the good start that we have on engagement with the project itself, and a friendly reminder that the survey is open till the end of April. Is that correct, Sophia?
Mm-hmm.
And that feel free to pass that on to your community networks and your employees to help expand our reach. We're also really, I'm really honored to have a excellent cohort of community contractors. These folks are an excellent resource to the project. They're connected to their communities with active relationship networks throughout the corridor. And so they've just gotten started. We've had two orientation sessions, and now we're going to begin monthly meetings so that we're coordinated with the project, we're coordinated with their work, but they're really going to help expand the reach of the project and bring forward community voices and community feedback on every step of the way of the project. Each of these organizations are focused on specific areas, as you see in the area map, and 4 of the groups are focused solely on our communications and broadening that into their neighborhoods. So the next slide is the actual list of our community engagement cohort. I'm so excited to be working with these guys. Their community expertise is essential to the success of this project. We have organizations that focus on businesses. We have organizations that focus on youth. We have organizations that are culturally focused. We have organizations that are focused on their geographic neighborhood areas. And with that, I'll pass it back to Sophia.
Thanks, Joan. One last slide to kind of close off the engagement, and then I'll, if there's any questions or comments from the committee. But really what we need to do in the next month is have a lot more meetings, talk a lot to specifically with people, get that word out to the broader community, to Mike's point, right? And so really thinking of those targeted events that get deeper into our communities. We want to hear from everybody, right? So it's identifying both areas geographically and within specific demographics where there's gaps that we need to broaden the conversation. And the cohort's really awesome with that. And a lot of you on the call as well that, you know, they're engaged so heavily, have ideas of how to do some of those things. And we always like to hear about that. And then, you know, we're starting to get a lot of feedback. And so the project team has a directive, you know, to start answering those questions and thinking of how we can continue those conversations with those next steps. And so responses are both like the day-to-day, right? But then over some of these overarching themes that we continue to hear about and having meaningful information to share about that. So that's the engagement land. I hope that was helpful. And turn it back to our chairs for any comments or discussion.
Hi, this is Mike Steinhauser again. Quick question for you, Sophia, and or your staff. Has there been any reach out to the press in area 1, 2, or 3? And has there been a suggestion of inviting them on to these calls so they're a little more involved and they can report back to the community?
So the easier part of the question, we have not asked the press to come specifically to these meetings. We have a lot of press that follow our agendas. So as we post the agendas, there's, especially with our CMC, we have people that are actively following that and just do show up. I don't think our communication team has really push these meetings specifically, but we do follow them. And then the media is a very important piece. So with the initial route release, we did put out a press release that targeted media from all of the 3 areas of the project. And both Kyle and Trevor are on this call today, and they've followed up with prominent media, as well as Kyle has been working with a bunch of other media sources to kind of reach where people are listening. So Commissioner Fernando and Councilmember Chambliss did, for example, interviews on KMOJ and other things like that. So it's kind of and as well as like print ad buys and things like that. So ongoing media efforts for sure.
Okay.
Sophia and Mike, if I can just also add to that as well. CCX is a pretty strong follower of a lot of activities of the Blue Line extension. I believe at the end of the month, Commissioner Lundy in particular is going to be doing like a Facebook Live event that also involves them. So we are working with them. Again, like everybody, we ask folks to follow us on Twitter. The BAC and the Community Advisory and the Corridor Management Committee meetings are all public meetings. So it's a great opportunity for not just media, but for everybody to learn what we're doing. So I appreciate the question, Mike. It is something that we're encouraging a lot of our media networks to just always be visiting with us on these issues.
More transparency, the better. All right. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on what Sophia's presented so far? If
Okay.
not, you want to jump into supporting communities in place, Sophia?
Sounds good. We'll kick this off. And myself, Sam, and Dan are kind of going to co-present this. So I'm going to kind of cover the slides, but Dan is going to add in a lot of places, and so is Sam. And this next section is really meant to be a kickoff, a start of a conversation. We hope to have a lot of discussion as we move through the slides on this one. Dan, anything to kind of set us up?
No, I think I just want to say we're excited this week to begin to talk about what we are terming here on the agenda item as supporting communities in place, but which has to do with the parallel but very important function of how and what building a major capital project like light rail into communities means, and how to address some of those both direct and not so direct impacts like displacement that take place as part of and can become part of building a big significant project like this. And so we believe that we have started anyway to get our arms around where we can go with this topic, and we're excited to work with all of our committees, business advisory, community advisory, the CMC, and with our engagement cohort as we work forward to kind of start to look at how we can address the not so technical where the tracks go, where the stations go kind of issues, but impacts the community. So we're looking for a lot of feedback on here, looking for some help and direction, looking for some guidance from you all, as well as from our other committees to help pull this together. So excited to move this forward.
So we've shared this slide before, but this kind of is where we continue to seek solutions buckets and the various parts of the project. So our last meeting really focused on some of that early conceptual engineering. We talked a little bit about the project goals and how we will evaluate our options going forward. Those continue parallelly, but today we really want to focus on these bottom two. We pulled the part of those buckets forward. Now we need to pull these buckets forward as well. So today we're focused on kind of the anti-displacement, equitable development, as well as thinking about some of those previous project impacts and honoring getting solutions for them. So to kind of frame us up a little bit is kind of like why are we talking about this? And it is something that we heard very strongly, both as we've released our routes and in our kind of project pivot. So in August, when we started talking about where this project could go and moving away from the freight rail right away, here's some of the things that we heard right away. So that displacement and gentrification were major issues for the community, and that folks wanted to deal with them, address them, and find solutions head on right away. That development really has to emanate from the community itself and align with community vision. I'm preaching to the choir in a sense here, because I know a lot of you are basically already realizing this vision within your communities. This BAC is kind of a powerhouse of folks that are working in this world, and so your expertise on that is I think really will be invaluable, right? This is your world. The previous alignment brought investment. Those needs remain. Some of those visions, say for example on 55, where we were calming traffic or improving pedestrian connections or many other things, they still remain. They didn't go away. And this is a topic that the project office can throw out things, but it's really something that community needs to be at the table with. We are not all the experts, right? Some of the expertise is in this room on this call right now. And just kind of, we both heard it, and I think we acknowledge that as project sponsors, as folks that are bringing the light rail, that we have as a staff an obligation to think of strategies and policies and bring them forward. In what we heard initially, we also heard a lot of aspirations. And I think that in previous work as well, just really acknowledging and reflecting and celebrating the existing vibrant community assets, that this is part of that conversation. Thinking of how to expand community wealth and support folks that are in our neighborhoods. And the resources. That some of this stuff isn't free. How do you bring those resources and find tangible solutions to do it? And also recognizing that it's their community members, private entities, nonprofits, philanthropic or agencies, all bring something to the table. So this is some of the reflection from our project partners. So this is our staff kind of coming together and thinking. So we recognize fully that we need to work together to address these concerns at all levels and across sectors, and that really some of these solutions are across sectors. To leverage some big ideas, you need many people at the table that some of it's our governmental agencies, but it expands beyond that. We're a big honkin' infrastructure project, right? And with it, the mere presence of us doing our work, trust becomes a big question, right? Or what are we going to push forward? What are we doing? What are we really thinking? How is this all working? And even the sustainability of the effort, right? Are we going to kind of and then leave and drop topics and not really fulfill the conversations that need to be had? And then even just recognizing past trauma of major infrastructure projects and how we kind of fit into that bucket of past impacts and similar things, right? You can draw parallels to major infrastructure and harm, and just doing it different, right? We need to think about that. And then recognizing that the tools that we have and expertise that we have in the project team might not be what works for every community. And that's why diving into that next level and really thinking about those pieces is important and specific. Turning to Sam or Dan to see if there's anything that you want to add in terms of the framing.
I have a question for you, Sophia and Dan. So your very last comment here, recognizing our existing tools might not work for every community. So and this is more edification for myself. Ultimately, we're not going to make everybody happy here. Is that correct, Dan?
Well, certainly, and I mean, our job, I guess, is not to our eventual job is not to make everybody say we want LRT, we love it, we think that this is the greatest thing ever. I mean, that we're not there to sell that to everyone. We are there though to make sure that we understand where people are coming from in terms of impacts, that we provide as many benefits as possible, and that we hear and address to the best extent possible people's concerns, realizing that there may be times where for the greater public good of moving this project forward, we're going to impact a business or a resident or a various neighborhood in some ways. For example, I'll use any of the streets. When we're building LRT in a street, that street currently has driving lanes and parking lanes and turn lanes and adjacent sidewalks. And so if we all of a sudden put LRT there, we can't just put it there and have everything remain. In some places, we're going to lose parking. In some places, we're going to lose turn lanes that were there, and the street will become right in, right out. Some driveways will become right in, right out. We might have to buy property from corners or acquire the front of various properties. And so it becomes a kind of a give and take on what the impacts are versus what actually implementing the project can be. And so there will be people that will not see that as positive, and there will be those that do see it as positive. So yes, we are not going to be able to move a project forward that does not result in some conflicts and unhappiness, but the goal is to minimize that. And in each of these various communities, and what we're touching on here is that what are the kind of things in each community that can help the end point vision. And you're going to see later in here, what success looks like will be different for different communities as well, in terms of what success is both for the implementation of the project and then the long-term benefits associated with it.
Okay, I just, wanted to lay it out there because we're not going to make everybody happy. And if we're going to try to make everybody happy, we should all go home. That's all I'm saying. So this isn't going to fly if we're going to try to make everybody happy. That's all I wanted to say. So thanks.
Mike, this is Tim Baylor. You make some good points. I think it would be helpful if we got some perspective on what these other lines have done as it's gone through various communities throughout the metropolitan area. What has it done to the business and the traffic and the growth of University Avenue, as an example? In each one of the lines as it goes through the community down Hiawatha Avenue, what has been the disruption? What has been the impact? And from a community perspective, has it been worth it? So I think if we start to look at some of that information from a historical perspective and put it into a matrix and look at what are some of the comparables to some of these areas that have been impacted along our corridor, and whether it's section 1, 2, or 3, and maybe we can start to to formalize in our minds whether this is good for us or not.
Yeah,
is that possible?
Yeah, I think
that's a real good suggestion. I mean, because you're right, and it even changes. It even changes along some of those routes. So there's parts of downtown and parts of University Avenue, parts of Hiawatha that are doing better than others. Why is that? What are the reasons? Can we make decisions around implementing a project here that tend towards the areas that thrive?
If I could just maybe add a little bit to that conversation, that's exactly the work that we do want to bring forward and share. I would just also say, going back to that question about that last bullet about recognizing our existing tools might not work for every community. It's sort of the analogy that we might have really good hammers and, we've sort of fine-tuned the work of our hammers, but what we really need to do in the instance of the Blue Line extension is actually fine-tune some of our screwdrivers. And so it's our recognition from our project partners is that we need to maybe give up a little bit of what we think the solutions need to be and actually bring the right tools to the project as well. So it's challenging us a little bit in terms of being more flexible and being able to pivot and really tailor this to what the community needs along the Blue Line extension. So appreciate your comments today on that.
And I think we have a good action item to already list right in the feedback in terms of data that to bring forth, and you know, kind of to that. There's perfect example. That's kind of the Tim's idea is an example of, or request is an example of, you know, something that's actually helpful for the entire corridor. But as you get into specific areas, there's specific questions that then also might get pulled out with that of, you know, what's worked on previous lines and things like that. And so that's also where recognizing the tools, there's nuances to how we use all of them as well. Okay, please jump in, continue to jump in. Anybody is welcome to, and have a foundational slide, and then we'll get really into the discussion. So part of our project commitment as well, and as we bring this conversation forward, is that we do recognize that we need that other folks, community, nonprofit, etc., have a role in not just the discussion, but the solutions themselves. And that as we think of, when we get kind of into the discussion, thinking about forming a table, really recognizing that role and bringing it forward. We know we want to actively address both short and long-term needs. So, you know, when we think about how long this work is going to take, or what we're doing, it's not just this year. It is the duration of the project, and maybe even beyond. So it's, you know, and there is both things that could be addressed in the short term, to things that need to get implemented as we get to potentially later stages of the project. And resources. I mean, that is kind of one of the biggest things that that I think is being pulled out of the conversation, is that we both need the resources to staff and support and pull together information, and then to actually implement, right? This is to really have an impact, having that framework of the resources need that can be pulled through is important. And we don't want to admire the problem, right? We don't want to just sit here and provide lip service. We want to get to a place where we can take tangible, actionable, measurable steps. And both in, you know, and some of that is just like what Tim suggested, is just pulling together data and showing case studies and bringing that forward, and then much bigger things as well as we move through. So this tees off our initial discussion, because as we've heard a lot about displacement and gentrification, and to Sam's point, is the project team doesn't want to suggest hammers if what we need is screwdrivers. So coming to a shared understanding and definition is what we hope to begin to do. And so if the chairs are open to it, we would like to really start to have an overall discussion of how folks would define these topics. So displacement, gentrification, other community benefits, and other necessary things.
So before we get into that, do you have, and we can get this later, the displacement, gentrification, and community benefits, have that been defined already on the previous lines? Because I would like to see, you know, how much gentrification happened, how much displacement happened, you know, how much community uproar was there. I mean, I didn't really pay attention to the other lines when they were being constructed, so, you know, I don't want to make the same mistakes that they may have made.
And Tim, or Mike, sorry, there is definitions of these, right? Both Met Council has some preliminary definitions, City of Minneapolis has versions. Really, to answer that question, we also want to know how all of you would define these items.
So you're talking home displacement, business displacement, road displacement, stoplight displacement, just about anything, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be the case. I mean, there becomes the idea of obviously things that are, sometimes I think of it in terms of direct displacement, right? If part of or a property is acquired as a result of the project, that may be a direct displacement. If a turn lane is removed or parking is removed, there's a displacement of that. Those are direct. Those are direct pieces. Sometimes indirect displacements are things like, what about impacts during construction? How do we avoid impacts to businesses during construction by making sure we get access in and out, by making sure people understand that it's open? We spent a great deal of time, I know, on University Avenue with businesses are open. University Avenue is open, right? I mean, it was a 4-lane roadway. It was open. When we closed it, the road on University Avenue itself never closed during construction, but it was restricted to a single lane in each direction and a lot of traffic left. Absolutely, no question about it. So we spent a lot of time at that time putting together measures that said University Avenue is open for business, putting out some marketing information. We worked with some nonprofits to do some of that work to show that it was open. And then there's also kind of the indirect displacement piece that says, what happens if by building the LRT, what happens to property values? How far directly from the alignment to property values change do people start to have problems with affordability? How do we keep housing costs affordable so that we're able to keep the residents that are in the neighborhood there? That's a whole another piece of gentrification and displacement that is even more difficult to wrap your arms around. So those are all, in my mind, within that general kind of topic. But of course, that's a little bit of my thinking about it. I'm sure all of you have different ways of what you see as what are the critical areas that we need to address as we define these topics.
I'll take it that yes, we are in this discussion around our shared understanding of these terms. What I wonder is if it would be helpful for folks that we see what you all's definition is of this. I don't know how many folks came prepared, like looking to define these, especially folks who might not be familiar with the terminology, even in this context, or experience with it. So I think it would be I think it's it could be a difficult discussion for everyone to like really enter into in a way that we're all feeling like we're actively contributing. So perhaps it might be easier to respond to you all's definition or build on that or take away or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, good point, Felicia, because I've dealt with displacement and community benefits, but I've never worked with gentrification before. I know what it is, but I don't know how it works and what's happened and what the process is and how it deflates and how it moves people. I mean, I need a lot more education on it to really understand it or even make a decision as to how I'm going to define it.
I think that, Dan, Sam, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, this is the introduction, right? So no, we don't need. We can certainly pull together what we've used and what we've seen. We talked a little bit with folks from the park board yesterday. We talked with folks from the city, from various cities. There are different definitions from previous places, and it certainly can mean different things to different people. And we are just introducing it. So yeah, we're happy to put that information out, receive some feedback back. It helps. You'll see as we move on that eventually understanding what we collectively as a project team view this as will be important as we make sure that we are addressing the specific topics that we want to get after. And so I certainly think that that's something that we can do.
Dan, if I could just add to this, is the good thing is that we actually don't have a definition for displacement and gentrification, as Dan said. We can pull from other areas, but our hope and maybe our work with you all and with the Community Advisory and Corridor Management Committee is to actually craft what works for the Blue Line extension. So what I'm hearing is that we can pull in some of those examples, but really, if we could work together and modify and improve these definitions that can be used. So we can pull some of that and bring that out. And if we can suggest, though, we continue to have a conversation so we can build some consensus about what these definitions are. And again, we would be doing this work collaboratively with the Community Advisory Committee, and then hopefully the two, as well as the Corridor Management Committee, can really craft that. And Sophia, I think, brought a really good example of like how the principles came together for the project, that we would also develop that consensus on these definitions, and they can expand, right? We can add to them, we can modify them as we continue our work as well. But I appreciate that as a good takeaway for staff from today's conversation.
So Sam, Dan, and Sophia, so can we table this until you get this information to us, and then we'll put it back on the next agenda?
Yeah, we can. And as we kind of move through the rest of the conversation, people might have additional input. And maybe just to even kind of to Sam and Dan's point is that we don't expect to have this conversation just today and then drop it, right? We wanted to come back in May with some follow-up, and we might need to come back in June, and then it's kind of taking those next steps to actually form a working group that to tackle this. So kind of moving forward. So I'll move us forward, and there's probably Alicia, give your hand up.
Yes. So I feel like when I first raised my hand, there are several things that were said that I want to respond to almost as well. Just wanted to clarify, we're just defining it collectively right now. Then I also wanted to offer that I don't think that it would take May or June to start a work group around anti-displacement or gentrification. I think that work group could start immediately, honestly, and within that work, helping define that and doing some of that work in that work group, I think would be helpful. So again, the work is also happening along with these discussions, and it'll feel and be, I think, a bit more productive for us with like this really short timeline that we have. So that would be what I would offer for that.
And I want to
comment. Yeah,
and I want to amplify what you just said as well, is just that there's people working on this, right? And really leveraging that and getting it going. Okay, so building the table so we as a project team, and hopefully all of you will kind of resonate with this, is that we want to establish an anti-displacement working group that will create implementable recommendations. And kind of to that whole scope, we'll kind of talk a little bit about that, because it's things that are very direct to the project and could be much broader as well. So a couple pieces of that. We want to build a team that has the support, expertise, and resources to deliverable, measurable outcomes. And we have some expertise in the project team, but not enough. We need a lot of you to fill that out. And what we'd hope to do is find resources, leverage resources to actually find a third-party facilitator. So Sophia at the table as Met Council, Dan as the table as the Hennepin County, right, kind of puts a head at the table. By finding a third-party facilitator, it really creates more of an equitable conversation. So that would be part of that goal, is actually finding that person and putting resources to hiring them or bringing them on board. We want to meet on a regular basis through the duration of the project. And again, this work, some of it's parallel, some of it is 100% project specific, some of it is broader. we want to continue to bring that work and that information back to our advisory committee. So both all of you, as well as our corridor management committee, and some of the work that Hennepin County is doing through their community work steering committee.
Sophia, is it appropriate to establish an anti-displacement working group before we establish the route that the blue line is going to take throughout community?
Sure, though. So that's timing is like the critical question, right? And it is really a balance, right? Because in some ways we don't know where the route is going to go. But we heard also kind of from the beginning, us even suggesting possible solutions creates pressure. And at the end of the year, when we select a route, we feel that it would be advantageous to already have this work and this conversation going. So kind of from ground one, you have where your route's going to go. You maybe already have data baselined. You have goals that you're working for. So we're not always just playing catch up. So we can kind of get around this conversation. And there are probably some universals as well, right? Like, for example, the group might identify the need for construction support. Well, whatever that route is, if we're on center running streets, that doesn't necessarily change, right? So that's just a kind of an example. It might not even be the focus, right? But it gives us time to start really putting that structure together and that work together.
Yeah, Tim, we really do. I mean, as we've talked about it, we really do think that that it's not too early to start. There will be specifics on specific routes, that we will have to address. I mean, once we know where a route might be, then there might be some specifics that this group will attack. But I think there are, as Sophia said, a lot of universal concepts here about just how to deal with it. And, just announcing the routes all of a sudden puts into context in the community, ooh, what might this mean? And so how we kind of get planned for that and how we get around it, we think it's a parallel effort. We also think, and just I think this comes up on a future slide, this topic is not a route selection topic. This topic of displacement and gentrification will follow us through the entire project, and including when we get to opening day, because what happens in community and what happens around station areas and how we deal with the effects and impacts of LRT will be ongoing all the way through construction and longer. So we think it's good to start it early. We think it's good to put a significant and solid team together that can help us deal with this and kind of follow this throughout the project.
And I want to also Felicia put some comments in chat, and just want to further emphasize, we heard from community, do it better this time. Think about it, think about things earlier, learn from what you've done in the past. And we part of bringing this forward now is to rise to that challenge, and be deliberate about that. Okay. So again, this might be something that everybody needs some time to think about, and we need to continue the conversation afterwards. But basically a few questions that we have for all of you. And kind of to that, who would be a trusted facilitator to manage and convene these efforts? And this is both, could be an individual, right, a trusted, respected person, or an organization, kind of, in both, right? Like both an organization and a person within that organization, or somebody, maybe a consultant on their own, just kind of getting some feedback on who that would be. And then as we think about this table, obviously Met Council and Hennepin County want to be part of it and really push things forward. But there are a lot of groups, I would say, even kind of folks on this call that we want at this table that are doing some of this work. But we don't want to just volunteer you, right? We want to kind of hear as well, whether you're a philanthropic organization, nonprofit, kind of who would be helpful to be at the kind of like the core working group that can help us deliver outcomes. And we know we need broad community engagement on some of these topics, but really thinking of those leaders, players, visionaries that are in the community that are leveraging resources and ideas. And then other public agencies. Maybe we need MnDOT, right? There's parts of their world that come into what we're doing. So with that, turn it to our coachers.
So at this table, you're thinking of, we need to look at anti-displacement in general. First off, let's say individuals, all right? We're going to displace possibly people's homes, whether it's rental or whether it's owned. We're going to displace businesses, all right? Whether it's owned or rent. So we have tenants and landlords to worry about. We also have to look at the government piece to this. This group seems like it's getting awful big already, and I don't know what, the bigger the group is, the less it seems like it gets done, but I want to get some input on how have you done this anti-displacement in the past? And obviously, sounds like you haven't had a lot of success, or I shouldn't say a lot of success. I think Felicia's notes here says that in Harrison, it was like, here it is, and we're done with that. How are you gonna, first off, I don't know who would chair this because it would be a very difficult group, number one. And number two, who's capable? Is there an organization capable of doing this? Meaning like someone who we would hire to do this.
Yeah, I mean, we have ideas. Going to that last question in terms of people that could be the facilitator. Alex just put the Alliance. Others have suggested Kira or the. I'm just blanking on the name of the organization. Sam, help me out. The Center for Economic Inclusion.
Yep, Center for Economic, and if I could just maybe add, Mike, your questions are good. There are definitely groups that are very grounded in this work, and what we're hoping to do today is kind of tap that experience, folks that might have interacted, maybe have engaged, maybe even participated in some of this work. Blue Line Coalition has done some of this work. They've brought in other voices. So I hear what you're saying about the individuals, but we're hoping to maybe just take it up a level of where we can really have folks around the table that have experience, have success, and also are thought to as a resource group. So the project management team, think of us as a resource group where we can bring some of those, not only Minnesota experiences, because quite frankly they're limited, right? We've only have 2 lines under operation, 1 line under construction, but there are other parts of the nation that have worked in this area. So to bring some of that data and experience to the table as well. So we know, and I think our chat's filling up here. We've got the Alliance, we've got Blue Line Coalition. Some of the neighborhoods like Pillsbury, I know, have been working in this area. So if there are, since this is the Business Advisory Committee, maybe one of the lenses that the Business Advisory Committee can bring is who have you worked with or heard some of their work that can bring some of that displacement and and gentrification issues from a business perspective to the table. So so that voice is represented in those seats that the virtual seats right now that are represented.
Felicia, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I totally hear and get, especially how we're socialized around who the expert is. I would just wonder if anyone has had success with preventing gentrification and displacement in Minnesota before we put that caveat on who we're going to work with to do this. I've done a lot of amazing things without prior having success in it, but still had success because I was committed to, reaching that goal and did the things that lead me to that end. And I think that if the group gets together with the goal of establishing anti-displacement policies, especially on the front end, is what I urge us of this, right? And there are people who have already been working on it utilizing different tools that we can help with engaging both community and a group like ours, scorecards, different things like that. Even some things that I'm learning exist here or are being developed here or from other places. And these are people who have done a lot of research, gone to conferences. Some might have even taught some. So we do have folks here working on it. What we haven't had, I don't think, is a commitment from a group like us with the support of entities like, Met Council, et cetera. So I do think that that would be a different thing. And if we're thinking about how we require to be resourced in order to achieve those goals, I think that's going to be like an important thing for us to also get to. So I do want to offer that. I don't know that anyone's had success. I mean, with the way things look, right? If they have, bring them to us. I'd love to work with them, right? But I just don't want, again, like someone said, I don't want that to pause the process, but I definitely hear you, Matt, with that.
Felicia, respectfully, I don't know how we talk about displacement until we talk about alignment and locations. As an example, the line is going to come through Robbinsdale. No matter how it comes through Robbinsdale, somebody's going to be displaced. Somebody's not going to be happy. My discussion around displacement is going to be totally different if you're talking about putting a stop in front of McDonald's. If you're not talking about putting a stop in front of McDonald's, it's a different story. If you want to put a stop in your shopping, in front of your shopping center, Mike, taking up your parking, it's going to be a different discussion. There's going to be displacement. There's going to be some impact on housing, whether that's gentrification or however you want to define it. And so to put the cart before the horse, in my opinion, is to talk about how to deal with displacement before you identify what the displacement is going to be. And so maybe I'm not in a hurry with this line, and I'm not sure that we should be in a hurry with this line, but I think there should be some more robust discussion about the alignment, the proposed stops, and then how we deal with the impact of impacting businesses or displacement. I think generally when we speak of displacement, we think about displacement of residents and housing, but businesses are going to be impacted now and in the future. And until you specify where those locations are going to be, I don't know how I can engage in a meaningful discussion about displacement.
So Tim, I think there's multiple facets of this, right? So there's because of the infrastructure of the project, there would be either a direct impact to a property or an indirect impact. And in your example, we found that if you place a station right in a business district, that land all of a sudden becomes often much more sought after for redevelopment. And potentially, if you're a tenant, your landowner might want to increase rent, right? Because for example, on Southwest, a lot of our stations are targeted at major employment sites, right? So we know that while the line can bring really positive impacts and customers and even employees accessing jobs to a business district, we know it also can place pressure on those existing businesses to potentially change or transform or to reinvest. And while the project will, have to do this list of, okay, we need to buy 2 feet from the front of your building or from the sidewalk, or there might be a property here and there that actually is fully impacted, right? We still need to work through that. Some of these pressures, or even thinking of how construction might happen. So anyways, want to acknowledge that we can't fully define some of these impacts at this point, right? We don't know, we haven't placed all of our stations, we haven't done all of our engineering. And I understand too that it's difficult to have the conversation, but even in what I'm hearing of the request for information, for data, those are really actionable steps that we could take, for example, right away.
If I could maybe just offer a little bit to Sophia's comment on that. And I would also say part of our work is to just balance all of these interests. We've also heard that there are some community members that can't help us identify an alignment or stations until they understand we're getting serious about some of these larger issues as well. So I think it definitely comes from the perspective of how you may be served by this line, how this line may potentially impact you. We get that. We also, I just want to offer up that we are hearing from community members that until we get some of this framework in place and show commitment and begin to maybe even see work on this, it would be exceedingly hard for them to actually weigh in on any of the alignment options that have been shared so far.
Any other comments or thoughts on these initial questions? We have a couple more questions to ask the committee, and obviously just taking where the discussion goes is perfectly a good place to go as well.
Sure. Good morning. This is Kenya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I hope everyone's well. It's Tuesday morning. I think that, so I guess I have a little bias. The Alliance is an agency, at least I know I've worked with since like 2007, statewide around transit and transportation, who really does have like an anti-displacement. And by that, I do understand what Tim and Matt is saying about the experience, and displacement is inevitable. I think how it's approached and how reducing it is critically important, and which is why the communities most impacted have to be in front of these conversations, not only just here, but at the ground level. And just wanted to just throw it out there to say that the Alliance has a lot of experience in that work. So it wouldn't be like research based. It's more so, but in that there is a lot of experience around the country with folks doing anti-gentrification, displacement work. So in St. Paul is a great example in itself, the Green Line. But the other thing is that I do want to support the idea that we do need, folks with, yes, experience is critically important, but also that fresh perspective and lens is also critically important. But I really don't have a lot more to add other than plugging the work of the Alliance, agreeing that, we need a multi-pronged strategy of experienced people, but also being open to folks with more experience in community than just the professional transit work, transportation experts, if you will. So that's really it. Thank you.
All right, Sophia, for in essence the time, we got about 20 minutes left. So if you want to jump into next steps.
Sure, we have one more kind of table setting question, and I think the committee has actually kind of brought some of this up about kind of these initial actions, in this need to define what success would look like as we move through this. I'll just, Mike, per your request, our last slide is just a little bit of the next steps that I'll hit first, and then we can kind of back up and kind of do a little bit more conversation. And what our goal would be is to have some of these initial kickoff conversations, and then come back and have this be an agenda item in May for the committee as well. Really focused on kind of having a little bit of that structure and plan together for you all to react to, so that we could begin to meet and to implement. And kind of what we need to do is we need to develop that approach and start to form the working group and begin to identify some of that initial framework for that group to kind of get into. And there'll be a lot of definition to that when we get the group together, but getting those pieces of setting up a structure, getting a convener, all stuff that we need to start rolling on. So we're hoping that through this round of committee input that we start to get kind of the head nodding of the direction and the desire, getting some of those initial suggestions. And I know as people ruminate post this meeting, sending the team, suggestions of people or the desire to participate. And to Kenya's point as well, like it's not just transportation people, right? It might be folks working in housing, or you have groups that are land banking, or just in community that would help this conversation forward. So that's what we want to move forward for. We don't have any other agenda topics today. So kind of going back a step, these are also the questions that we have for the group today. Is kind of when we think of convening, what would be some of those initial actions that we need to get to, that we need to do? We heard, I think, a few requests for data and best practices and examples. And then we both thinking about how we would define success, or what success would look like. And that's actually, these are big questions, because they also speak to different phases. So in the sense that we can chunk some of that up as well. So I guess I'll turn it to all of you for thoughts.
For me, Sophia, I want to talk to the people that did this before us. I want to know who the chair of that was. I want to know the committee members. I want to have discussions with them. I want to know where they feel they made mistakes, where they could have improved. I would like to have an open table discussion with them and say, where'd you mess up and how do we not mess up?
Sophia, if I could just maybe share a little bit with the group today, and specifically to Mike's question. So really, this is brand new. We did not do this officially with the Central Corridor with Blue Line. There was a very similar model, however, with Central Corridor with the existing Green Line called the Central Corridor Collaborative. That was funded partly through a Federal Transit Administration grant. We were one of the few communities in the nation to receive it, and that really kind of supported the work of this. So we are happy to bring some of the work that they've done forward, but I would also just provide our challenge is also our opportunity, is that we really get to create something that models and really fits and is tailored to the Blue Line extension. So again, I think we're happy to bring some of the, I think as Felicia and Kenya brought in, is that there are voices of folks that have done this work for a while, but not in a collective sense to specifically really address some of the potential impacts and successes of a light rail project here in Minnesota. So this is new. This is going to be new for us. And so there's a little bit of risk in doing that. That we're going to have to step forward together, but we want to do that absolutely together. And please know, like I said, we are going to have this conversation with the Community Advisory Committee as well. So we want to bring that their thoughts back to you, so you can hear what they're saying as well, and maybe we do a combined meeting with some of that. But we can bring forward a little bit of the work that was done on the Green Line. But I would just share with you all that this is brand new. This is something that the council is going to challenge themselves on. It's Hennepin County is going to challenge themselves on how we do this together. So with that, think of this as the vision, right? Like if we really wanted to think about how we move together on that and what does success look like. And Mike, I'm hearing from you, it's like, how could we begin to define that success? What does success sort of look like? And again, a little bit more from that business perspective, that will help us with the conversations and help us guide us through collectively who needs to be around that table to help ensure success also is a product of this work.
And just also want to recognize that, I think as brought up earlier in the conversation of national examples, and wanting to pull together some of those resources as well.
I would just say that perhaps the closest to this that I'm aware of is the Equity Council, the folks at Met Council. Those are all folks from community across the metropolitan region who come from a variety of areas, from transit, from transportation, freight, housing, business, etc. And so I think that they're probably going to be the closest type of council, if you will, with this broader experience. But I think that I don't want to really define success too much because that really, in my opinion, has to be led from those very communities around what they're interested in seeing, what those benefits are for their communities, across where the line is. And so I think that for me, just being open as as a council, as a committee, to understanding the community's interests and doing our best to meet that where we're able to, I think helps determine success. And so I think the prescription, it's great. I know we have to define things to a degree, but being agile in this process is critical because they're going to be the experts around what the benefits and success looks like for their communities, from Robbinsdale to Northside to Brooklyn Park, every area that it touches.
So agenda item number 1, in a sense, when we convene this group. Other thoughts? And you can even kind of, I know it's a broad, big subject, right? So we're kind of having everybody react to the first thing. And so even just kind of, as Kenya brought up, these kind of critical pieces of how we think of stepping forward.
I can go quickly. I thought what Kenya said was spot on for sure. And while honoring the expertise of community and kind of having that ultimately form the metrics that drive success, I think just a couple like guiding principles that I'm thinking about and that Move Minneapolis and I guess the chamber to a broader extent is thinking about too, is just making sure that people in the community right now are able to enjoy the benefits of this project afterward. I think that's really important. And then also just, I work with transit riders as part of my day-to-day job, and making sure that the people that depend on transit and rely on transit that this serves them well. Sometimes I think the choice rider gets like, this commuter that's currently driving in from like a million miles away gets all the preference for like park-and rides and all this high quality service. We should be focusing, in my opinion, on the people that depend on transit and making sure that this project works for them. And then the last thing, I know this is a little bit outside the scope of the project, but from a climate perspective, transportation is the #1 emission source in Minnesota. And this is a 100% electrified transit line. That's a small piece, but a big investment in climate action. So I think that should be kind of driving the metrics as well.
Thank you, Alex. And I like you, I've spent a lot of time working directly with our existing transit riders, and it's a value that I really bring to this work as well. And the green infrastructure piece and what that means, I think, is really coming forward as well as something that we're hearing kind of across the board from folks. So really, just I think we have to turn a lot of our attention as a team to that specifically.
You want to move on to next steps, Sophia? We got about 5 minutes left.
Sure. So, we're committed to bringing this back to the committee. I again would like to offer that as you think about it over the next week or whatever, if you have additional thoughts, feel free to give me a call, to send the project team an email. Sometimes it's even hard to have these discussions in a big group. So the extent that, we can have some offline conversations even to kind of talk about all of this, really invite that as well, either in small groups or, in one-on-one, like just want to that is always on the table. I'm the kind of person that I really like kind of having smaller conversations because you feed off of each other, right? Instead of being in this kind of big group setting, you really can kind of go back and forth and talk about things, and you all bring a lot of expertise. And so I value all of your time when you give it to me to walk through a lot of that. So just leave that as a next step as well into our commitment to continue this conversation and get very quickly to implementation, but just wanting to bring the conversation back for the next and that final bite of the apple to really get this. So with that, our next meeting is officially May 4th. If folks are wanting to have more conversation before that, just let me know. Otherwise, our next meeting will feature this topic as well as hopefully advancing some of our engineering questions that many of you are bringing forth. So kind of probably be a very full meeting, I would anticipate. That's what I got, folks.
Anybody have any other questions before we adjourn?
I would just say that, and I just sent Sophia a quick message, but I'd like for, and perhaps this happens at our next co-chair meeting, us to figure out ways we can support all areas, offering insight and feedback during our discussion time. But that's it for me.
Good point. Yeah, kind of breaking that out a little bit as well.
Yeah. Great.
And if I could offer up for the co-chairs, since the next meeting is Tuesday, May 4th, if this happens to also be a Star Wars theme, I'll just leave that at your discretion.
Oh, May the 4th be with you. May
the 4th be with you.
For any of you that aren't as nerdy as Salmon.
Wow. It's only 9:25 and I learned something new today. That's awesome. Great. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, see you guys.
Liz, I'm going to grab the chat quick just in case.
Excellent. I've also